Good morning, everyone. My name is Robert Hersey. Happy Friday to each of you. And on behalf of the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association, welcome to today's webinar titled Non-Suicide Self-Injury, Why It Happens and How to Respond. This webinar is being made available through a collaboration between the Florida Department of Children and Families and the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association. Please note that as an attendee, you are in listen-only mode and are only able to view your name. Your webcam and microphone have been disabled. If you have questions, please send them to all panelists by using the chat panel. The button to open the panel is usually located on the upper right side of your monitor. Please use the chat panel to send any questions you may have as you think of them. We will be answering questions throughout today's presentation. Our audio is broadcast through the internet to your computer. If you experience poor computer audio at any time during today's presentation, there are a few options to try using the Communicate menu. For computer audio, click the Communicate menu, then click the Audio Connection panel. Click Disconnect, click the Communicate menu and Audio Connection panel again, then click Call in using the computer and follow the instructions. If you continue to experience poor audio through your computer, try using the I will call in option under the Communicate menu. The access code and event password will be posted in the chat panel momentarily. You must be connected to the audio of this presentation and view it on screen to receive a statement of credit. We are unable to verify attendance if you are not connected to WebEx via a computer or mobile device. Therefore, phone call only attendees are not eligible for a statement of credit or CEUs. The recording and materials used in today's presentation will be available on the FATA website within 30 business days. To access the recording and PowerPoint, visit www.fata.org, navigate to the Resource Center, and click on Training Library as shown on the screen. FATA produces many webinars and workshops through the support of the Florida Department of Children and Families. To help participants track credit earned through attendance, we host an online community that provides a personalized digital journal where participants can maintain statements of credit for webinars and workshops taken through the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association. A statement of credit and CEUs for up to 2 continuing education credits are available for participating in today's webinar. CEUs are available for persons licensed through the Board of Nursing, the Board of Clinical Social Work, Marriage and Family Therapy, Mental Health Counseling, and for persons credentialed through the Florida Certification Board. Completing the evaluation at the end of today's webinar is necessary to receive CE credits or to access your statement of credit. Please note that the evaluation will close at the end of the day on Wednesday, January 29th, 2025. At the end of today's webinar, you will have 3 opportunities to complete the evaluation: a link I post in the chat, a follow-up email from WebEx, and an automatic web browser pop-up when I end the webinar. To complete the evaluation, you will first need to register or sign into your account. Please ensure that your name and email address match the name and email you used to register with WebEx. Information you provide FATA as part of registering remains confidential. If you are a licensed healthcare practitioner, be sure to include your Florida license number for reporting to CE Broker when you register with our site for the first time. If you are certified by the Florida Certification Board or licensed outside the state of Florida, you do not need to provide your license or certification number when you register with our site. If you need assistance with account registration, login information, or accessing the evaluation, fill out a contact form on our website or email training@floridabha.org before January 29th, 2025. Please note that WebEx monitors the arrival and departure times of attendees and provides a report upon completion of the event. We are not permitted to provide a statement of credit if you do not attend the entire webinar, and we are not permitted to provide partial CE credit. Statements of credit will be posted within 30 business days after the evaluation closes in the professional development section of your FATA account. For licensed practitioners, CEUs will be reported to CE Broker within the same time frame. Today's presentation is intended solely for educational purposes. The views, opinions, information, and content expressed in the presentation are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the state of Florida, the Florida Department of Children and Families, the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association, or the Florida Behavioral Health Association. Attendees should note that sessions are recorded and published in various media. Our presenter today will be Laura Holley. Laura is a subject matter expert in stress management and a certified master resilience trainer with the U.S. Army. Currently serving as the Director of Training and Education for the Community Coalition Alliance, Laura has nearly 20 years of experience in prevention and mental health. She holds over 17 certifications in evidence-based curricula, a master's degree in counseling and executive leadership, and is co-host of the podcast The Brain Factor. Laura lives in Orlando with her husband and teenage daughter. And now I'd like to welcome our presenter, Laura Holley. Laura, I will turn it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Robert. I appreciate that. And good morning and welcome. And thank you everyone for making the time to be here today. I'm so excited to see so many of you. And while Robert was giving his introduction, I was looking at the chat and I see so many familiar names and that just warms my heart and is very exciting. Speaking of warm, I hope everybody is staying warm. I see people from all over the state experiencing very atypical weather. Here in Orlando, we did not get snow, but it is very cold and gloomy and feels like winter. So I hope everyone is finding the moments to enjoy in that, as well as the frustration that I know comes along. So thank you. I appreciate you being here. Let's dive in. So today we are going to cover a topic that's a little difficult to talk about. We are going to talk about some of the research that's available in the field right now about self-injury. We're going to try to determine, try to increase our understanding about why this happens and what we can do. Before we get started, I do want to give a little blurb about my organization. I work for the Community Coalition Alliance, and we are a coalition of coalitions, aggregate coalition, if you will. So we work together to create a collective voice among our membership body to work towards the health and wellness of all Floridians. We focus on issues with science and data. We are very data-driven and evidence-based, focusing on the risk and protective factors in our prevention work. We operate in three main areas. The first being our membership body. I think we're sitting at 19 or 20 members right now from across the state, saturated in the Northeast region, but we do have members across the state. Most are coalitions. Some are nonprofits with aligned missions, which is very valuable and helpful to us. We also are able to provide some funding and some oversight for that funding within our membership body. We operate in an area of training and technical assistance. That's me. That's stuff like this. That's why I get to be here. And then, of course, partnership engagement. I see so many of our partners on here as well today. And so I'm preaching to the choir when I say that as a collective, we are often able to leverage ideas, efforts, resources, and partnerships at a much more effective and meaningful level as a whole than we can sometimes do in those silos. Our value system is on the right-hand side. This guides everything that we do and shows up in all of our prevention. So that's a little bit about us. And then today, what are we going to walk away with today? I want you to walk away with an increased understanding about what non-suicide self-injury is, why it occurs, and part of that is learning what it isn't. There's a lot of misconceptions about self-injury. We are going to spend some time really figuring that piece out together. I also want you to learn today how to effectively respond to a discovery or a disclosure of non-suicide self-injury and sort of walk through what that looks like. It's going to be very important for us to understand the complicated relationship between non-suicide self-injury and suicide behaviors. There is a relationship. It's not what most people think, and we'll get into all of that here in a bit. So how are we going to do that? We need to put this in context first. So we're going to talk about mental health in general, just sort of where this fits and how we kind of get from one to the other. Then we're going to dive into non-suicide self-injury, what it is, explain it a little bit. Then we're going to talk about that response. Then we're going to talk about that relationship. At the end, we'll have time for questions, but also feel free to drop them in the chat. There's folks monitoring that. So if I miss it, someone else will get it. I am going to ask you guys some questions as we go through and try to get some quick feedback from you when we are entering different sections of this. So hopefully we get some of our questions and our do some myth busting, some things like that. So I think we're going to learn a lot today. Diving in, all right, let's put this into context. Let's talk about mental health on a whole, right? I can't stress this enough, and we will see this come up again as we talk more today, but it's very significant to really understand that non-suicide self-injury is not a mental illness. It's not in and of itself a thing. It's not something that someone gets diagnosed, right? It is caused by underlying distress, right? It's reflective of an underlying stress that is very frequently part of a mental illness or a mental health challenge like depression or anxiety. So that's the root, that's where it's coming from ultimately. And so why is this so significant, right? It's incredibly beneficial to have working knowledge of mental health challenges in order to be able to respond effectively to non-suicide injury. There's not a lot of research on non-suicide self-injury compared to other mental health challenges and behaviors. The research is lacking significantly. And we're going to talk more about that and share what is out there. But we know far more about depression and anxiety, and that's extremely helpful here in situations like this. Think of it like your car's engine. Right? If your car's engine light comes on and you know a little bit about the common issues that cars can face, you've got a far better chance of being able to identify why that engine light might have come on, how to fix the issue. Like we could just go in and reset the light, right? But like that's not going to actually solve anything because the light at the end of the day wasn't the problem. And so we really need to understand some of these underlying issues in order to be able to respond effectively. This is a good time for me to point out that this information in this webinar is designed for the non-clinical profession. So we are going to talk about what treatments can be effective, but we're going to put that in context for someone who's trying to bridge that gap between, discovery or disclosure of this in someone we are working with, supporting, or someone we love in our family or our friends, and that profession, right? So we've got to have a working knowledge in order to bridge that gap effectively, but we are not in this scenario, in the context of the information I am sharing here, we are not the clinician. I may have some clinicians on here, so I just wanted to make sure I made that very clear, what lens we are looking through this at today. Okay, so moving on. Let's talk about a couple of things about mental health. Okay, let's talk about some statistics and some facts of it. It should shock people. 19.86% of the population is walking around experiencing a mental health challenge any given time. Right now, I know the ticker, it keeps going up, but right now I'm glancing, there's 311 of us in the room. 1 in 5, it's a significant amount of people just in this virtual space that are probably struggling with some sort of a mental health challenge. It's very common. Again, note the language here, not diagnosis, not disorder, challenge, right? Mental health challenges are common. Any room you walk into, do a little quick math, 1 in 5, right? People struggle every day. It's common. The prevalence is right. So the next thing to know, so if so many people are struggling, who's getting help? Not a lot of us, right? And so that's the thing to understand. So the first question that I want to, oh, thank you. So, somebody did the quick math for me. That's not my strong suit. So roughly 62 of us in this virtual space. I love that. Thank you. I want to ask you guys a question. What do you think is the time frame between when a person first experiences, so the average time frame, somebody's experiencing some symptoms of a mental health challenge and they've now gotten professional help? How long does that take? What's that gap? What do we think? Just drop in the chat. Got 3 years, 1 year, 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, 5 years, 1 year, 2 years. Okay, great guesses. The average 10 years. That should blow your mind as well, right? 10 years. And I want you to keep that in the back of your mind because, and you might hear me say this again. I think I'm getting ahead of myself, and this is in my notes later. So if I forget I said it, I'm probably going to say it again. But getting a disclosure of non-suicide self-injury is a gift. It's a gift, right? It allows you to move that needle. And so 10 years, right? And then I saw somebody throw in the chat, it's gone for me already, but somebody said, and so many never get help. 41% of people who are struggling with a mental health challenge never even get help at all. And so that's almost half. So, we're kind of doing something wrong as a society. And even I have to admit it, as an industry, we're learning every day. And so one of the reasons why I really like to sort of rip that Band-Aid off and just say, hey, collectively, we're not always getting this right, is because I want people to have an open mind when we start talking about things like stigma, start talking about changing the way we're talking to people. Some of it feels like, oh, that's hokey, or I'm not going to do that, or I know how to talk to people, right? Just know that like people are still waiting 10 years. The other thing that I want to share that's related to that is if it takes someone 3 years or 4 years because of something you said, it's a success, right? We have to be realistic about some of our expectations, and that can really help us help. The good news is, and something that's nice to have sort of in your back pocket when you are trying to help folks for support, is that recovery from a mental health challenge, it's not just possible, it's probable. When people get the correct help, by and large, people do recover, and the recovery rates are um, better than some of the very treatable, recoverable physical illnesses that are very common. And so that's something that's really hopeful when we're trying to instill hope in people and we're talking to them. Even something as misunderstood and as hopeless feeling and as dark as non-suicide self-injury, people recover when they get proper help. So that's a very important thing to know and to believe. And then finally, people are more likely to get help when somebody close to them suggests. And so even if you get told to buzz off, and even if the door gets closed in your face and you feel like it was ineffective, statistically, it likely wasn't. What's heard more and more often, and if I have any clinicians in the room, they'll absolutely back me up on this. What they're hearing more and more often is, so tried to tell me that I needed help years ago, right? They did listen. They waited less than 10 years, right? So it moves the needle. And oh yes, Gail, I see your comment. We are going to get to that for sure. But you are spot on with that. Families play a key role, right? Identification, recovery, in all of this stuff, and specifically in non-suicide. Empathy and understanding and action makes mental illness less disabling. I want to talk about that for a minute. What makes something a disability, right? When we talk about disability, it really is rooted in, are we able to work, carry out our daily activities, and have successful work? By work, it's whatever work means to you. Right? So for younger folks, that might be school. For somebody who is staying at home and raising children and taking care of the home, that's the work, right? If you're retired and you're volunteering, that's the work, right? So being able to work, being able to do that, being able to carry out your activities of daily living, right? Are you able to shower? Can you get yourself ready? Can you go to the grocery store? Can you participate in the world? And are you able to maintain your relationships, your healthy relationships? So that's typically what's looked at when we say what makes something disabled. So how does empathy, understanding, accommodation, how does all that fit in? Think about the ADA, right? Think about how much more disabling using a wheelchair might be if we didn't have ramps, if we didn't have elevators or 36-inch doorways or aisles, right? So if there wasn't accommodation, would folks who use wheelchairs be able to work, carry out daily activities, or would their relationships suffer, right? So accommodation matters with level of disability. So let's put that in the context of mental health. Typically, and I don't have actual statistics on this, I always like to mention when I'm speaking anecdotally, but I've been teaching a long time. And when we talk about mental health, when we talk about disability, and I always ask, what if anybody in the room has worked with somebody who has been going through cancer treatment? And almost always several people in whatever room I'm teaching in, that seems to be a very common thing. That at some point in our career, we've likely worked with somebody who is being treated for some sort of a physical illness, usually. So I personally worked with several people who have gone through cancer treatments and continued to work. And so you see that process that they go sometimes, and of course that process looks different for different people, but largely speaking, you see the diagnosis, maybe you see some of the emotions, you start to see them missing work here and there. You might see them entering treatment, they might lose their hair, their physicality may change in some way, and then we see the recovery and we see them getting better and looking healthier, and we're there for it. We're there for the whole, we have a front row seat to that entire arc. And we know that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. This person is going to be on this journey for a long time. So somewhere in the middle of that journey, let's hypothetically say that person comes to you and says, I had a treatment yesterday. I thought I was going to be okay today, and I'm really not. Can you cover my 3 o'clock meeting? Absolutely. I'm going to do everything I can to help and support you. I'm going to cover that 3 o'clock meeting. I might even make you a lasagna and send you a card and call you a hero, right? Now let's talk about the person who's in treatment for depression. And we come across, and they come to us and say, I had therapy yesterday and I thought I was going to be okay today. Not. Can you take my 3 o'clock? It's not received the same way, right? That's not received the same way. If we find someone crying in the bathroom at work, the first time we might be empathetic, we might be giving that understanding and that accommodation and that action to help them get through that. On the third time, we might be questioning or even verbalizing whether they can do their job. We're not doing the same thing for the person who's recovering from the physical. So empathy doesn't show up the same way when we are talking about mental health disorders, which contributes to the level of disability. And so that's just something I want to sort of put a bug in your ear for your consideration, that empathy, understanding, and action meaning accommodations, really make mental illness and mental health challenges less disabling. When we go back to that first bullet point, that's why it's important. Because 62 of us in this room, 1 in 5 of us in any room that we're going into, right, are struggling in this way. And so knowing that can help us help people better, get them back to good. So what are some things that we can do, right? What are some things that we can do? Stigma, somebody said it, we saw it go through, right? Stigma. There's a lot of power in withholding judgment. The words that we use matter. And again, keep in mind that this section, we're trying to eventually put non-suicide self-injury in context here. So this section, this is a whole thing all by itself. So I'm just sort of touching the surface on some of these, but know that the words that we use matter. Small changes can have a really big impact. One of the things that I always try to instill in people is a very simple, easy thing that we can leave here today and we can all do is any word that is an actual diagnosis. It's not an adjective, right? The weather is not bipolar. We are not OCD because we want things to be a certain way in our office, or we're extra, or a neat freak, or whatever other words we use that are stigmatizing, right? You're not claustrophobic if the elevator makes you nervous. You got in it, didn't you? Right? So you're not any of those things unless a doctor has diagnosed you. So that's a very important thing to remember. This will come up again because there's several places in which her journey will show up. But in addition to my professional qualifications, I'm the daughter of, I am the mother of a teenage daughter who has struggled. She was diagnosed with OCD when she was 10 years old. And we are very acutely aware as a family of how often people use the word OCD as an adjective for their quirky behavior. And so it's something really to pay attention to. And also when we talk about suicide, right? You will hear me talk about suicide differently. We don't commit suicide. I try to change that language. We commit sins and we commit crimes, right? We die by suicide. We also don't have a successful suicide or a failed suicide. Not a success when someone dies. We have complete, we have incomplete suicides, right? And so that one's a little harder sometimes to change that verbiage, but so worthwhile because you never know who hears that. And again, going back to that 10 years, the impact it's going to make on someone that you don't even know. And so that's helpful. The second part of stigma is judging someone's why. Stuff is uncomfortable and hard to talk about, and it becomes harder even if we have a ton of knowledge when it's people that we love and care about. So if we're talking to people and we're trying to figure out why they're distressed and why they are feeling the way that they're feeling, um, sometimes they'll share with us the tip of the iceberg. We go, oh, yeah, that happens all the time. Or if it's somebody who's 14 and they're have a high level of distress over a breakup, we validate that or be deceived by that. Or if it's something we've also gone through and we were fine, right? We tend to say, well, that's not that serious. And we, and, and it's not always, the language isn't always that strong, but the sentiment is often there. And so we have to catch ourselves not to judge someone's why, because the why is not as important as the distress. So uh, so that's an important thing. Interestingly enough, total sidebar, but I saw it come through the chat. Somebody said, I've heard the phrase unalive, right? Uh, Funny you should mention that. That was actually born from social media, like picking up on certain words and censoring. So that word started becoming increasingly popular when talking on social media. But it has since left social media and is now something that is showing up in normal everyday. I just found it interesting that that's kind of where it's. Okay, so stigma. Stigma is something we got to pay attention to. Again, that's in a class all by itself, but I wanted to make sure we covered it here. So what do we have to look for, right? If we're paying attention to mental health challenges, ultimately the underlying distress that can lead to something like non-suicide self-injury, what are we paying attention to? Okay, signs and symptoms. Real quick, the difference between the two. Signs are something that you can see without me telling anything. You can observe a change in behavior, observe behavioral. A symptom is what the person is experiencing. So, good example of that is crying. If somebody is crying, that's the sign. The symptom is the emotion or the experience that is causing that behavior. Are you crying because you're sad? Are you embarrassed? Are you, angry? So that's the symptom. The sign is the actual tears that are coming out. So signs we can observe, symptoms are what someone is experiencing. So these are the things that we have to pay attention to in a person. Just overall, this is very general, like the physical, the psychological, and the behavior. But I want to look at this list for a second and infuse a little bit of logic here, right? So when we're looking at some of the things on this list, aches and pain, unexplained aches and pains. I'm 47 years old. I have unexplained aches and pains because I am 47, not because I am experiencing a mental health challenge, right? So we have to use a little bit of logic here. Look at some of this list: mood swings, paranoia, aggression, major changes in mood, right? Anybody else have a teenager? Right? So some of these things, anybody has gone through a hormonal change in their life, right? So anybody ever been tired or hangry, right? So we really do have to look at this list with a lot. Yeah, absolutely, menopause. I saw that in the chat. But we have to look at this with logic, right? So what we are looking at is a collection of new signs and changes in behavior, groups of these things that don't seem to fit anywhere else. And like, I'm laughing and I'm agreeing because I'm seeing menopause show up in the chat more than once, right? But even that was a change in behavior, a change in signs and symptoms that likely sent you to the doctor to discover that hormonal change, right? So even then, right, these are things we have to pay attention to. Would they be a hormonal change? Sure. Would they be a mental health challenge? Yes. So these are things that we do need to pay attention to in the people that we care about, the people that we're serving, and ourselves, right? So that's something that this is sort of the general overriding. Right? So let's say we've observed some of these things and now we want to address them, right? How do we craft an effective conversation when we are concerned about something? Couple of caveats here. This is a good model to follow when you have observed something and you are initiating the conversation, because that changes the tone. You are approaching someone, the risk of creating defensiveness, guilt, and shame is much, much higher than if this comes up in a conversation or if somebody comes to you. And so these guidelines are really geared towards you have decided to approach someone, and there's some different things we happens. The first thing that we want to do always is to express. We want to express our concern. We want to lead with the headline. The folks in the military have a great acronym. They love their acronyms. I used to work for the Department of Defense for many years, and this is the BLUF, BLUF, bottom line up front, right? We are going to start with the headline. These are difficult conversations, and the worst thing that you can do is to have the person talking to you for 5 minutes and they don't even know what you're talking about because you're uncomfortable and you're trying to get there. You're going to be uncomfortable. These things, this is easier, you just get better at it, right? But it's always hard. This is always hard stuff. So we want to express our concern. I am concerned. Definitely don't want to stop there because that all by itself will create defensiveness. That is the headline. That's the most respectful, effective thing that we can when we are starting a conversation. Tell them why we're talking about. Along those lines, also included in the why is the observation. We're going to keep this as neutral as possible. We are just going to state the observation, right? I'm concerned about you. I have noticed this. I have noticed that you're doing this. I have noticed that you're not doing this. I have noticed this change. Whatever the key or the core observation is, we're going to share that here. I'm concerned about you. Here's why. And again, that is direct and respectful and the most effective. All right. Now we're going to ask some questions. And the first one we're going to start with is just are you okay? Or can is there something that you want to talk about? Right? These are some of the things that we want to ask. There's a couple of other, if this goes well, okay, I am concerned about you. I've noticed you haven't been yourself lately. And, you've been very irritable. And I just wanted to touch base and see, are you okay? Is there anything that you'd like, right? And if the person says, you know what, yeah, I've kind of been in a funk. You're right, and I just haven't felt like myself, and I can't seem to get out of it. Right? A couple of helpful questions we can throw in there. Um, hey, how long I'm so sorry to hear that you've been feeling that way. Thank you for sharing. Thanking people is always really good. How long have you been feeling this way? Asking about duration can be very, very helpful. And here's why. With 1 in 5 of us walking around with mental health challenges, it's common. Right? Depression and anxiety is a normal part of the human experience, but it's kind of like a sore throat, right? A sore throat, if you get a sore throat, you don't go right to the doctor or call the doctor immediately, right? Your throat's not supposed to hurt. You know that something's wrong, but it's a pretty normal, abnormal experience. And there are some things that you can do at home that help, right? So you're going to have your hot tea and you're going to get your cough drops and you're going to probably not go out to dinner like you planned to tonight and you're going to take care of yourself. And the expectation is that in a little while, the throat's not going to hurt anymore and you're going to go back to quote unquote normal. If it doesn't, that's when you're going to call the doctor. Hey, my throat drops aren't working. I think I might need some additional. That's the same. The same is true for mental health. And so there are things that we know we can do at home, and usually we look at about 2 weeks or more, where that can be kind of a normal part of the range of human emotion. So if we're having this conversation with somebody and we go, "Gosh, thank you for sharing that with me. I'm so sorry to hear that you're struggling. How long have you been feeling this way?" And they go, "I don't know, since like Thursday." right? We can offer some support and we can offer some hope and encouragement, like, oh, is there anything I can do to help you? And how you taking care of yourself? And I know that can be pretty normal, but it stinks. We can have those conversations. That's a very different conversation than, I don't know, since July. All right, now we have somebody who might need their throat drops aren't working, right? So the next question that you can ask that helps prevent you from jumping to is, have you talked to anybody about this? Is there anybody else you've talked to? If we can fit that question in, that really helps tells us where we are in the process. Because if someone says, yeah, I tried to tell my spouse, but they told me to get over it, that's a very different conversation than, I go to therapy 3 times a week. Right? The first is going, hey, I'm sorry that happened. And a lot of people don't really understand. And it's not that they don't love you. And, what are you thinking you need? And, have you thought about, there's a lot of professionals out there that can help. Like we're going to have that conversation. We're going to have that conversation that validates and acknowledges that their feelings are. The person that's going to therapy 3 times a week, you weren't wrong in having this conversation. You picked up on something that was accurate, and it's just a process. So that's where you can go, how's that going? Do you feel like it helps? Do you like your therapist? If they don't, that's where we can offer that, maybe, it's kind of like any doctor. It's not a one size fits all. Have you thought about trying a different therapist? Or, hey, that's great. Let me know how I can support you while you go through that journey, right? So these are different conversations. Now, if we're doing this correctly and we've expressed concern and we've shared observations and we've asked questions, this is where we might encounter non-suicide self, either by discovery or disclosure. Discovery is not as common. For most people, this is an intensely private act, and it's well hidden. And always thank the person for sharing. Nobody has to tell you anything. Nobody has to show you anything, right? So keep it humble, and really remember that disclosure is a gift. They're reaching out for help. They've chosen you because you have done something right in this conversation, this relationship, and now you get to help. And so that is a gift. As scary as it is, and as uncertain as it is, it really is a gift. So after we've asked questions and we've gotten some information from them, now we can offer our support, right? And you've heard me model that a little bit, in like, how can I help support you? What are you doing to help yourself? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? We want to stay away from the word should, always, okay? Um, we always want to stay away from the word should. One of the things I like to say, because it makes people remember it and then they will hear themselves say it, stop shoulding on yourself and don't should on other people, right? So I hopefully you remember that when you hear yourself say it, because you will hear yourself say it. It's very normal, like, hey, you should probably think about, or you should do this, and then rephrase it, because we already kind of know what we should be doing, and that can be an alienating word when people are vulnerable. So we want to make sure that we are staying away from that as best as we can. Let's talk more specifically about what support looks like with non-suicide self-injury. To do that, we need to get into non-suicide. So there are some beautiful things in the chat about these conversations and about some things to, all of that is so accurate. But to get into that today would take us longer than the webinar. So I do recommend mental health first aid. If anybody on here is already certified in that, I'm an instructor in that. There's a lot of instructors out there for that. That really covers a lot of this stuff, how to talk, how to communicate, how to in much greater detail. So look for a class near you, and I definitely recommend that if this is part of this that is very interesting to you and you want to learn. All right, so let's dive into explaining a little bit more about non-suicide self, right? What it is, what it isn't. So what do you think of when I say non-suicide self-injury? What are some examples? What comes to mind? Absolutely. It's the first thing that was put in the chat. Okay, so cutting is the most common, is the most nice. There's another one in there. So cutting is the most common, burning, all of that, self-mutilation, right? So great. Okay, so non-suicide self-injury, the most recognizable is cutting. The most common is cutting, but it is not the only form. So how do we identify? Because some of the things that are showing up in the chat, my answer to that would be sometimes yes, sometimes no. And so how do we know if it is non-suicide self-injury, right? So here's sort of the criteria, the definition and the criteria. First, I'm going to say, before we get too far into this, because I don't want to lose the human element here. This stuff is very hard to look at. If you are receiving a disclosure, you have some sort of relationship with this person, highly likely. It's very difficult to see, to look at, and to see. And so be prepared for that. Again, this stuff doesn't get easy. You just get better at it now, but it never gets easier. And looking at the damage that somebody has inflicted on themselves, somebody that you care about, is and so know that. And and there's some folks who are sharing some personal stories in the chat. Thank you for sharing that. You didn't have to do that. And we really appreciate that. That helps us see that happens to people in real life and in everyday life. And it happens even when we are professionals and even when we know things. We can't always prevent this in the people that we care about. And, somebody even mentioned like, hey, I almost missed it, right? Like, yeah, even when we know, we almost miss it. So I appreciate that. That you guys chose to share. Thank you. That is also so non-suicide self-injury is any deliberate self-inflicted damage to the body without the intent to die by suicide. There is a version of non-suicide self-injury that can travel with suicide intent, not as common. We are going to cover that a little bit later, but largely speaking, non-suicide self-injury all by itself has the word non-suicide in it for a reason. It is not just connected to suicide, although there's a relationship. But it is deliberate self-inflicted damage to the body, and in the moment that the damage is being inflicted, the intent is not to die. So that is a very important statement. There are 4 criteria that the action and the behavior have to meet in order to be considered non-suicide self-injury. Okay. So the first is that the harm is intentional and expected. There's some risky behavior that could result in harm, like not wearing a seatbelt driving, or behaviors that can result in accidental harm, like extreme sports, right? Those things are typically excluded. Even if the person, and again, even if the person is engaging in these behaviors because of some underlying distress, and the appeal is that they might get hurt, and they're being reckless and it's on purpose, right? It's a different thing. It's not non-suicide self-injury. Non-suicide self-injury, the harm is intentional and it's expected, right? So we have to make sure that we know that difference. The second is that there is immediate physical injury. This goes along the lines of what we just said, right? Behaviors that do not directly result in physical injury are typically, even though they may be harmful or dangerous, right? So for instance, like food restriction, not typically considered a form of non-suicide self-injury since the associated physical damage builds up over time, instead of happening as soon as the behavior occurs. So think of the difference between like cutting and a risky behavior, right? We are cutting to intentionally inflict harm in the immediate, it's expected, it's intentional, the results are an immediate physical burning, right? Those things are very direct, very immediate. The physical injury is guaranteed. It's going to happen, and it's and not. So that's 2 of the criteria. The third is that it's not intended to cause death, right? Now, because of the relationship between the 2, there are risks, okay? Suicidal thoughts might be present when someone self-injures. Self-injury itself, that particular cut, that burn, not intended to cause it. Some people even, and we'll get into this a little, might use self-injury to manage suicidal urges or the intense distress that's related to suicidal thoughts. But self-injury enacted with suicide intent, the injury is designed to attempt classified as a non-suicide. And then it's the last criteria is to make sure that, things that are that cause damage but are acceptable in our society, or part of a recognized cultural, spiritual, or religious ritual, they're typically excluded by self-injury because the intent is wrapped up in something else. Behaviors like body modification, body piercing, tattooing, religious self-flagellation, not usually considered forms of and so we got to make sure that is something that we're looking at. So let's do a little bit of myth busting. Let's talk about some myths and facts with those criteria in mind. Some of this stuff has even, I saw one of them like sort of show up a little bit in the chat. So, all right. So what do we think about this? True or false? Self-injury only occurs in an adolescent population. False, 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 false. Excellent. I love that your knowledge base is already so great. You're coming from a great spot. Okay. Yes. So it is most common. It does show up a lot in adolescents. That's the largest group we see it in, right? And that'll make sense as we talk about emotional regulation, which is something we're learning in adolescence anyway. And so the instances are heightened. But it is most common in adolescents, but does not only occur, right? Somebody asked, what's the second largest group? Young adulthood, 20 and up. We'll get into that when we get into ages. But adolescence is the most common, but it occurs across all age groups, and even younger than adolescents, and even in an elderly population. This can occur across all ages. It does not discriminate. And so that's the first one. What about this next one? Is it an attention-seeking behavior? A lot of times this is dismissed as just trying to get attention. Oh, all right. A couple of people did that hesitant. I don't know, maybe, right? And that's the right answer, right? So what I like to reframe this. It's an attention needing behavior. Okay. So sometimes, not always. And somebody hit the nail on the head too when they said, actually, this is very often hidden. Right? It is. But when disclosed, that is an attention needing. If someone is engaging in this kind of behavior to quote unquote get attention, they really, really need, let's give it to them, right? And so this needs, so I think reframing that can be really, really helpful. And honestly, not just in non-suicide self-injury, but if behavior is harmful and behavior is strange and behavior is desperate, right? This is not someone who's just trying to get attention for fun. This is someone who's trying to get attention because there's an underlying distress. There's something that really is painful. And so just keep that in mind that like, yes, but also no. So the next one, self-injury. I think let's put this one up there because we already talked about this, right? But it can't be stated enough, to be honest. There's an important differentiation between self-injurious acts and suicide attempts. And it's so important to know that because the treatment is different, right? They require different interventions, different treatments. And then, mental health and counseling resources should be provided since self-injury is often signaling an underlying unresolved stress and then grow and lead to suicide. Right? So more longer term treatments. So dying is not the intent, and we really have to make sure that we know that. What about this last one? This last one's super uncomfortable. Self-injury is sometimes a good thing, true or false? Lots of falses. And depending on, oh, Hillary, bingo. If we had gold stars or prizes, Hillary would get one. So yeah, so it's this really uncomfortable truth. It's one we got to talk about, right? Sometimes it is what is keeping. And so here's the thing, like, and a few people have said, hey, it can signal help. Yes, sometimes it can have a positive byproduct in terms of its functionality. Sometimes it is what is keeping somebody alive. It is a coping strategy, a negative, but a coping strategy, right? We're going to talk about this again. This will show up in another context, but it can't be stated enough. It's why it's critically important that we stop self-injury by focusing only on resolving the underlying stress. So here's two uncomfortable things we have to consider. One is that if you are not a clinician and you are focusing on eliminating self-injury behavior, you're telling your loved one, don't do that anymore. Promise me you're not going to do that anymore. And all we're talking about is that we're resetting the engine, right? So if you do not have the clinical expertise to replace that the correct way and over time with another more positive way of regulating emotion, this could simply lead to the adoption of another self-destructive, just drug misuse. And in a worst case, focus on the injury, take away that coping strategy. You don't replace it with a healthier one because you don't know how to do that. A suicide crisis. And this is the job for an experienced and licensed. So it's a very important thing to understand because our desire, our immediate response, our immediate thought is and so this, as a sidebar too, this certainly underscores the importance of prevention efforts that focus on teaching emotional regulation, coping skills, all of those things before we need them, right? So we got to try our best, smile of soapbox, try our best to get particularly young people, the younger the better, to, those coping strategies. So that they are able to avoid the maladaptive, right? And yes, Lisa, to answer your question, it could be replaced with a coping strategy that has substances. Absolutely. So that's something that's uncomfortable to talk about. The self harm is likely serving a purpose, and the purpose could be keeping the person alive. So you guys did a really great job with the myth busting. Let's transition and talk about why people self. All right, why do people self injure? Self-injury is really difficult to understand. It really does feel like and appears to go against human beings' innate desire to avoid harm, right? However, the reasons someone might injure themselves on purpose are often similar to the reasons people engage in other harmful. So we kind of already understand this. We just don't understand it to this extreme very often. And so the other thing is that individuals who self-injure often report having more than one reason for their self-injury, and that the reasons also change over time. On for a very long time, the reasons for self-injury. Okay. The functions of self-injury can be classified into two broader categories. We've got the intrapersonal and the interpersonal, and there's functions that can serve under each one of those. Right. Self-injury for intrapersonal reasons is way more common than those for interpersonal, but both exist. And so let's take a look at what they are. All right. So in the intrapersonal, emotional regulation is highlighted for a reason. It is the most commonly cited reason for self-injury. Interpersonal reasons, they have to do with an individual's state, including their thoughts, their emotions, what's sort of going on inside of them. And so, emotional regulation being the most common, and managing emotional experiences. This includes escaping unwanted emotions or even inducing desired emotions. Typically, the emotions are negative, like anger, frustration, sadness, loneliness. But uncomfortable as it is, sometimes positive emotions like excitement and pride have also been reported for the self. A lot of folks will anecdotally report that this behavior serves as a release of built up tension, very much like if you take the lid off of a boiling pot and it releases in the right? And which causes relief. And then others report that, again, still under this emotional regulation umbrella, that it helps them to feel something, anything. when the underlying distress, because don't ever forget that it's coming from the underlying distress, right, leaves them numb and and so this creates. People also report that they self-injure to create a physical wound that's easier to understand than the emotion, right? I don't understand how I'm feeling. I can't cope with it. It's abstract. I can't understand it. I can't wrap my head around it. This is an abstract emotional thing, but this cut and this pain and this injury, that I can look at, that is something that is quote unquote wrong. That is an injury. I can cope with it. I can understand it. Right? That external processing. So that's some thought regulation. That's the next interpersonal function of self-injury. It's very closely linked to emotional regulation because our thoughts and our emotions are connected, but this is more of a quieting of intrusive thoughts, criticism, negative self-talk, even suicide ideation, right? This is where we quiet the racing thoughts that we want to. So it's intrusive thoughts more so than the emotions that and so we're starting to see logically how we could have more than one, because those intrusive thoughts are often going to come with emotional experiences and those types, right? Okay. Self-punishment. Self-punishment is another. It appears to serve it appears to serve an emotion regulation purpose, but self-injury for this reason is usually tied to feelings of shame or thoughts about us being flawed or bad. And somebody did put that in the chat, saying that it was, some people feel like this is, I deserve this. I am bad, I am flawed. And again, that external, I can point to this, I can understand it, this is my, and so those are the intrapersonal reasons and functions that self-injury can, um, right? So going to the interpersonal, right? Moving along to the interpersonal, this is about others, right? So this has to do with our relationship and our connection to others. And there are three main functions. Communicating distress, which I also saw go through the chat. You guys are putting such great stuff in there and I love it. But sometimes, again, going back to that external processing, right, is some people might not know how to explain their distress to others. They use self-injury as a way to communicate. They create the physical wounds because they're easier to understand, recognize, and we can show it to someone, right? There's also social influence. There's several motivations underlying self-injury as a way to influence other people, right? An individual may engage in self-injury to keep people away from them, to demonstrate their belonging to a social group, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, talk more about that, right? To elicit care, right? I need someone to care about me. I'm going to create something that will make you care about me, give me care, and will be the priority. And then also sometimes to encourage a change in behavior, right? And there's some social influence and some social aspects that can pop up. Punishment, the same way we saw self-punishment show up on the interpersonal, there is sometimes we are um, punishing another person, right, for something they've done or have not done. And in this instances, it's typically communicating a distress, serving an emotional regulation function out, right? So a lot of it comes, there's a reason emotional regulation is highlighted here because sometimes that's the sole and overriding reason, but oftentimes even in these other issues, it is uh, showing up as like a connector, right? It still has an emotional regulation piece attached to it. And I underscore that because, again, that continues to speak to the importance of prevention efforts that are centered around teaching emotional regulation. This is a critical skill for people to avoid all kinds of potential hardships in life, including non-suicide, right? Okay. Speaking of risk, let's talk about what those risk factors are. Okay. So these are the five main risk factors we see. And so let's talk about age, right? We talked about that a little bit already. Current research, sorry, suggests that it is more common between the ages of 12 and 15. And then there's a second onset peak in early adulthood around age. Some people first start to self-injure before the age of 12, and then other people do start much later in life. Something about that before 12, right? An age of onset before 12 is associated with more severe self-injury over a longer period of time, right? Typically, rates of self-injury increase early to mid-adolescence and decline in later adolescence. And when we talk about this being an emotional regulation piece, this is this is really speaks to why we see this spike in adolescence, right? So like there's a normalcy in struggling with emotional regulation as an adolescent and figuring all of that out, right? So if those coping skills aren't there, we're going to come up with our own coping strategies. Yeah, right. So that is something to keep in mind, right? So let's talk about like sex, gender, and sexuality. This showed up, gender showed up in the chat box as well, and I made a mental note to point that out when we go, right? But girls and women are slightly more likely to self-injure than boys and men, right? And this gender difference is particularly evident in clinical samples. What does that mean? That means in the people who got help, right, who got professional help, and it's only slight, right? So we, you know, to that point, boys self-injure as well, almost at the same rates. There's a slight difference, and it's only in the people that got help, which begs the question: is the stigma preventing them from getting help, right? So there's all kinds of unanswered questions there, but there seems to be a misconception when you talk to people, that like an anecdotal misconception that this is really a female, and it's just not. The research and data just doesn't support that. So it becomes very invalidated, particularly in young boys. I want to stop for a second because Kimberly just put something very powerful in the chat. We have not met one single transgender person that has not, right? And that speaks to the next point here, is that self-injury is also more common among individuals identifying with the LGBTQIA plus, rates 2 to 3 times higher, double or triple that of heterosexual or cisgender individuals. So that is something to, right? So when we look at the next one and we go to uh, culture and race, right? This is where we are lacking, severely lacking in correct data, right? So the research to date is focused primarily on Caucasian individuals from Western society. It's led to a significant gap in our understanding of non-suicide self-injury among individuals in underrepresented cultural and racial groups. Current knowledge suggests that self-injury is present across all cultures and races, right? And a recent study did start to show that there might be differences in age of onset and in functionality, but the differences are really complicated by social and economic factors and often fueled by racism. So there's a lot that really needs to still be done in the field in this space. We just don't know what we need to know here. Um, Moving on to the psychological profile, there's a lot of misconceptions. There was a meta-analysis that found that risk factors for self-injury include depression, hopelessness, abuse, personality, eating disorders, and impulsivity. That's not that surprising, right? People who engage, because we already know that from other studies that it's underlying distress. So all of those underlying stresses would increase somebody's probability because it's connected to an underlying stressor. So that being said, right, so people engaged in self-injury report being more sensitive to the interpersonal stress or conflict, and they're experiencing greater difficulty in expressing and regulating their emotions. So all of that being said, most people who self-injure do not have a mental illness. that's an incredibly important thing to learn, that mental health challenges, underlying distress does not always equal mental illness, diagnosable mental illness. So, and most people who self-injure do not have a mental illness. And so the really important piece to remember there is that it's so very easy for society when we do not understand some, something is scary and we lack knowledge to go, they're mentally ill. They must be mentally ill. And we not dismiss it, because that doesn't necessarily mean we're not going to do something about it, but we immediately put it in the mental illness category. And while it is connected to mental health challenges, that's a very real thing. A diagnosable mental illness is not present in most of them. So that's something it's just, there's such a paradoxical nature to most of what we know about non-suicide self-injury. And so I share all that to say we don't have to have all the answers, but let's stop ourselves short of jumping to and thinking that we do, right? Because the good news here is thinly veiled good news, but the good news is we don't have to know that, right? We just have to know that they have underlying distress. And so, so that's an important, okay? Which is a great segue leading us into the connection with trauma and hardship. And this will scratch the surface of some of the questions that I did see pop up in the chat with about socioeconomic status. And there's some stuff, and in some of my references on the reference slide at the end of this webinar, I believe there's one that specifically speaks to that, but there's not a lot in the field. But here's what we do know. Experiences of trauma, as we know, can leave a lasting psychological damage, resulting in intrusive thoughts, flashbacks, painful emotional states, and disassociation. Right. So when we know that that's what happens, self-injury, we already know, can be used by individuals that are facing these experiences, as it can be an effective strategy for escaping those unwanted experiences and ending dissociation. That's that I want to feel something because I'm feeling nothing that we covered before, right? So although people who have experienced trauma are more likely to engage in self-injury, it is a myth that all people who self-injure have experienced childhood. Okay, could they have? Yes, that's one of the things that can lead to that, but it's not this guaranteed causation and connection. Poverty is an additional risk factor for self-injury, with individuals from impoverished backgrounds are more likely to self-injure than individuals whose socioeconomic needs were. That's something that we do know. And Gail, yes, that is absolutely correct. The language matters there, right? Gail asked me to clarify if the statistics about 1 in 5 having a mental health challenge doesn't mean the same thing as a diagnosis. And that's correct. And that speaks to what we talked about before about how feelings of depression and anxiety can be part of the normal range of the human experience. And so at any given time, 1 in 5 of us are struggling with that at any given level. Everything from I am in a brief depressive episode to my anxiety is very elevated, to I have an underlying undiagnosed or diagnosed mental illness. Oh, 1 in 5. So yeah, so psychological profile, trauma and hardship, this is where the waters get muddy, where we go, yeah, that stuff's connected, but it's not causation and it's not guaranteed to be connected. It's not all the time, right? So my overriding point here is really just that humility in knowing that as an industry, we don't know a whole lot, and knowing that jumping to conclusions can be very harmful and stigmatizing to folks. So really staying in that wheelhouse of what we actually know to be true can be very, very helpful. And hopefully, as time goes on, more and more research and data becomes available that can help us. Okay, so speaking of which, let's get into some of the more complex. Is self-injury addictive? This is a burning question currently in the field. Most self-injury researchers agree that self-injury does show some addictive qualities and might serve as a form of self-medication for some individuals, right? So there were some extensive studies that were done at Cornell University with the students at Cornell. Sidebar, Cornell does some wonderful work in this area, and their website really has some great. That's another really great resource for you. Cornell University just does some really great work. But in the studies that I am referencing, about a third of those who report using self-injury regularly also report having a difficult time controlling their urge to injure. So moreover, interviews conducted for several of the studies associated with this overall project showed that many people who self-injure describe both like the immediate effect and the overall practice, the ritual of it, as something with addictive. So the immediate, the feelings and that immediate gratification, as well as the overriding um, ritual of the self-injury are both things that people have a hard time resisting the urge. So that's that addictive qualities, right? So the immediate effects of pain release, mood boosting endorphins, right? And that's come up in the chat. That was a question where we're going to tackle that. While the delayed effects are damaging, reinforcing addictive, maladaptive coping strategies that induce. For example, many interviewers talked about moments of feeling the strong need to injure, even when there's no obvious trigger. And they also talked about having like self-injury free hours or days or periods. Okay? They also liken it to other drugs and talk about needing increasingly more or deeper injuries to feel this. And so that's where we're starting to see some parallels with some addiction qualities. Right? So recognition of the addictive properties of self-injury for some individuals, like just their own recognition, is the basis for the addiction hypothesis, suicide. The addiction theory suggests that self-injurious acts might solicit involvement of the endogenous opioid system, the EOS, which that's the, if this is your wheelhouse, then that diagram makes sense to you. If not, I'm going to do my best to walk us through it, right? This is the system which regulates both pain perception and the levels of endorphins which occur as a result of injury. So the system has a pathway that results in awareness of pain, which causes us to feel it and to respond to it. Also has a pathway that tempers pain so that it doesn't impede our ability to function, right? So that's where you see that like ascending and descending on that diagram, right? So the activation of the system can lead to increased sense of comfort or integration, at least for a short period of time. Studies are showing that repeated activation of the EOS can cause intolerance, meaning that over time, those who self-injure might feel less pain while injuring. So overestimation of the EOS can lead to actual withdrawal symptoms, which in turn lead to more self-injurious behavior. Some support for the addiction hypothesis has been found in recent studies of whether or not addiction models apply to self-injury. Now, I know that there is going to be a lot of questions about this. There's a lot of unknowns. It's just very early studies that are showing that this system is activated, that continuing to activate this system reduces the effectiveness, for lack of a better word, of the injury. It's not producing the same results. And so we need, as to give you a concrete example, deeper cuts more often, stronger burns more frequently, right? To get those same results that we were getting to emotionally regulate. And then that coupled with the anecdotal, the qualitative data that's being collected in these studies at Cornell that's saying, they're self-reporting, I can't control it. There's an urge, and I have a hard time resisting that urge, even when I am focused on being injury-free. So that's what's creating this this addiction hypothesis when it comes to self-injury. The other burning question is whether or not it is contagion factor. This is very uncomfortable, and again, emerging research and right. The seemingly rapid spread of self-injury behavior among community populations of youth suggests that there may be a contagion factor. So key early studies show patterns of social contagion even before the internet and social media. And that's a whole other thing we'll get into here in a second. Self-injurious behavior has been shown repeatedly to follow epidemic-like patterns in institutional settings, like hospitals, detention centers, and facilities. Studies suggest that discussion of specific acts of non-suicide self-injury among individuals who self-injure has been shown to trigger social contagion in group treatments. For many, however, though, and we've talked about this already, self-injury is very private. It's a very hidden act. Multiple studies show that most research out there shows that many who self-injure, like no one knows or even suspects that they injure. However, we're getting more and more in the field anecdotal reports from adults working with youth in school settings that report almost like a fad-like quality to the behavior, similar to what occurs with eating disorders. Consistent with this, survey results of secondary school nurses, counselors, and social workers are suggesting that there may be multiple forms of self-injury in middle and high school settings, some of which include groups of youth injuring together or separately as group membership. So exposure to peer non-suicide self-injury may put adolescents who are already experiencing certain psychological distress at a particularly high risk of perceiving non-suicide self-injury as a favorable coping strategy. Causes for the spread of behavior in non-clinical populations have left a lot of people wondering what larger contextual factors might be at work. Recent research suggests that the internet that shouldn't surprise anyone, and the increasing prevalence of self-injury in popular media, movies, books, news reports, they may play a role in the spread of self. Even and there's very little research in this field, but it's growing, but in this particular pocket. But even movies and TV shows that show the dark side tend to unintentionally, maybe, I'd like to think unintentionally, but romanticize this behavior. And if we think about how much it logically makes sense, if you're creating a movie, as an example, your entire job is to create something powerful that makes you believe this is your subject. Unless it's a documentary, right? It's going to be shot beautifully. It's going to be set to music. It's going to be edited. How do you not romanticize whatever it is you're talking about, even if you're showing the dark side, right? And so there's some growing research, personally, that I have been very interested in along that side, but I digress, right? Group settings can also mean social media. They don't have to be in person to be a group setting that might display some of this just very interesting. There was a particular piece of research, technical research that was conducted on TikTok in partnership with the Algorithmic Transparency Institute and AI forensics, using automated accounts showing the automated accounts showed mild interest in general and neutral mental health issues. Those accounts, it showed that after 5 to 6 hours on the platform, almost 1 in 2 videos were mental health related and potentially harmful. Roughly 10 times the volume served in accounts that did not show that interest. There was even a faster rabbit hole effect when researchers manually rewatched the mental health related videos that got suggested on the For You page for these dummy accounts. That was between 3 and 20 minutes, as quickly as in 3 minutes. That's mind blowing, right? 3 to 20 minutes in, more than half of the videos in the For You feed were related to mental health struggles, and multiple recommended videos in a single hour romanticized, normalized, or encouraged self-injury and suicide. So that's really shows that dark side of social media, and this particular research project was done on TikTok, but I'll tell you anecdotally, my very first experience with a group of, in this particular case, it was adolescent young women who were self-injuring, was back in 2005, I think, it was five, and I was working in a school setting, and it was on MySpace. And they had put the skins on that were, I didn't even know those types of images were available at that time. I mean, everything was relatively new in that social media world, and that was a group of young women. And so there was a dark side then. That dark side has only gotten more sophisticated. There, you know, and I know I have so many people on this webinar, so I'm assuming we're running, which is such a beautiful thing, the gamut of generations. So not everybody might be um, uh, might not be familiar, right, with all the platforms, but like it's common language, like on TikTok, that to refer to it as like different types of platforms. What do I mean by that? Like you watch a whole lot of funny cat videos, and that's all you get on your algorithm. Some people call that cat talk, right? I was on cat talk. I was on this talk. I was on, and it's to refer to it as the subject matter, right? There is a dark side of the dark side of it, where everything you see when you log in is that, right? And so I have also seen this on Instagram. So on the Meta platforms, they are not um, um, immune to this, and even on Pinterest. It takes a little longer for that algorithm to get there, because you see some of the stuff on TikTok was within like 3 minutes, and then within the hour it was just totally gone dark, right? But even on Pinterest, those aesthetic and inspirational boards, if you spend too much time on certain things, it starts to get very romanticized with slavery and with suicide ideation. And there's some really great things being dropped in the chat about what people are seeing, right? Recovery account, right? We're seeing that stuff. That's the sort of the buzz phrase. And if this is a rabbit hole on social media that a person has fallen down because they are experiencing these thoughts, feelings, or even behaviors, they are going to quickly learn the hashtags, buzzwords in the accounts, and how to look for and find this information. And then the platform is going to continue to give it over and over and over again, right? Now, I do want to talk about this really quick. We're going to kind of get back into the group setting stuff in a little bit, because when we talk about how to respond, I want to share some information. Let's talk about, this showed up very early on in the chat box with people asking questions about this, and I sort of mentally tabled it, right? So there is a category of challenges that is called body-focused repetitive behaviors. This is something that I happen to know a lot about. I told you she would come up again, but in addition to my professional expertise, my teenage daughter first exhibited what turned out to be very early signs of obsessive compulsive disorder when she developed trichotillomania as a small child, which was hair pulling. And that's when I first learned about body focused repetitive behaviors. It's not something that I learned even in my master's. It wasn't something that I learned until I encountered it in my real life. So that is something that is disappointing to me, that there's not more information out there about body focused, but they are a thing, and they do not meet the criteria for non-suicide. Now, that's not to say that some of these behaviors might not show up as a non-suicide self-injury behavior, but if they are showing up as a body-focused repetitive behavior, not the same, right? Keep in mind intent, immediate harm, self-punishment, right? All of those criteria that we covered earlier. So what is body-focused repetitive behavior? Right? These are any repetitive self-grooming behavior that physically damages the body, and multiple attempts to stop or decrease the behavior have failed. Right? This is a group of behaviors that's where individuals pull, pick, scrape, bite hair on their hair, skin, or nails, resulting in damage to the body. So the damage results. The intent is not necessarily to damage. They're not consistent with non-suicide self-injury because they don't meet that criteria. Mainly, they're not used for emotional regulation overwhelmingly, and there's not an intent to harm, right? So hair pulling, that's trichotillomania, is characterized by the repetitive pulling out of one's hair. It can occur on any part of the body that grows hair, most commonly the head of hair, but also eyebrows, eyelashes, and many others. In picking is another one, right? So and this one's a little bit like harder to understand, because occasionally picking at our cuticles, acne, scabs, calluses, other skin irregulations is very common human behavior. However, research does indicate that potentially 2 to 5% of the population ticks to the extent that it causes noticeable tissue damage and marked distress from impairment daily. Individuals who experience this body-focused repetitive behavior, they pick, touch, rub, scratch, or dig in their skin in an attempt to infections. So there's the intent piece that's different, right? And smooth out areas. And the behavior typically begins in early adolescence, although it can really begin. Um, Nail biting, that's another one, right? While few scientific studies have examined nail biting, it's believed to be a fairly common behavior, right? It typically begins in childhood. It involves damage to the fingernails by means of habitual biting. And, if it is a body-focused repetitive behavior and an issue, it's extreme, right? So at the extreme, the general population engages in chronic nail biting, but prevalence estimates really greatly vary, right? Estimates ranging from anywhere from 12 to 44%. Despite this being incredibly common behavior, there's just not a lot that's been nailed down about prevalence in the study. But we do know that it is a normal behavior up to a certain point, just like the skin pick. And when it becomes compulsive, when it becomes severe damage, and when repeated attempts at stop. Cheek biting is another one, and that's that fourth body focused repetitive behavior, sometimes called cheek chewing, and it is chronic cheek biting can result in a lot of complications. This is redness, painful sores, and tears that can occur inside the lining of the mouth. And for some, after the repetitive biting occurs, the lining of the cheeks can start to feel irregular, which increases the urge to continue to bite in an effort to continue to smooth it out. And so it becomes very repetitive. And so with all of these body-focused repetitive behaviors, psychologically, feelings of guilt, shame, and hopelessness can arise, and social activity can decrease in order to prevent others from observing the behavior, right? So why did I include this? That's why, right? So if we're talking about non-suicide self-injury, we need to have some sort of general understanding about not just what it is, but what it isn't. And a lot of times, and this is that goes back to that paradoxical nature, a lot of times was it what it isn't, and ultimately put us on the path to become to engage in that behavior, right? Because if at the end of the day, non-suicide self-injury is related to underlying stress, and these conditions can cause underlying stress, you got to know about them, right? We also have to know, this is a different treatment. This is a different intervention than something where I am intending to cause harm to myself and I'm meeting those other criteria for non-suicide. So um, this is something we need to. Okay, so moving along, right? How do we respond? It took us a long time to get there today, but this is why we're here, right? We want to know, what do we do? How do we effectively respond? Again, I want to remind you, this is designed for non-clinical or not even professionals in every man, right? So we're going to stop short of giving clinical advice, although we are going to talk about treatments because it's important to know what we're asking for, what we're looking at, what it might look like to get help for ourselves or for someone else. But know that there will be sort of a line in the sand for folks who are bridging the gap. Okay. So how do we respond when we have received it, right? It's important to know first, like what we're up against, what we're responding to, right? So we're responding to underlying stress. We're responding to these impacts. So there's short-term and long-term impacts on individuals, as well as their relationships, their friends, partners, families. In the short term, many people report that they feel a sense of calm or relief right after they self. Knowing what people are feeling is really important, right? Some people do also feel guilty or ashamed, and they worry about judgment and stigma. And that's what causes a lot of this, right? Understandably, this contributes to feelings of shame, isolation, anxiety, and those feelings can make it very hard. In addition to the emotional impact, physical impacts include injury to the body that may or may not need medical intervention, and some methods of self-injury carry more risk than others when it comes to injuring more severely than intended. This is where it starts to look like it could have been suicide behavior because we just injured more severely than we meant to. And that is a risk that comes with self. So proper wound care is essential to ensure that injuries do not become infected or cause other really uncomfortable, very necessary conversation. And that is if we are, this is more in our personal relationships. If we are walking through self-injury recovery with someone, we need to have on hand the things that will help with it. It doesn't stop overnight. And so we've got to make sure that we're not compounding issues with things bring medical. In the long term, there is people engaged in self-injury may report worsening depression or anxiety, physical consequences like scarring and difficulties in their close relationships. Parents and caregivers, teachers, mental health professionals, often, no matter how much knowledge base you have and experience, feel frightened or confused when they find out that something is. It's a scary thing. And though self-injury is often associated with emotional and social strain, some studies show that the process of addressing and healing from self-injury can bring some relationships closer and enhance self-understanding, especially when the person feels well. So walking through this with somebody, it can actually bring people closer. And so there's a lot that can happen. Okay, before we talk about how we intervene, let's just kind of put the big emergency cone up first. Okay, before we talk about responses, know that in the case of a medical emergency, there's no response besides 911. Period. Emergency medicine. At the end of the day, we don't let people die. Right? There are no strategies here except for calling an ambulance when a medical emergency is present. Everything else can. And so what is that? Overdoses of medication, consuming poison, gaping cuts, large burns, rapid pulsant bleeding. They're saying they feel no reason for living, no sense of purpose. Those are all suicide crisis words, right? Feeling trapped, no rage, confused or disoriented thoughts, and unconsciousness. Everything else can wait. Those are 911 calls, period. That's my disclaimer, right? So assuming none of those things are present, assuming there's no immediate medical emergency, let's explore how we can. So the initial response, this initial response is we want to avoid displaying any kind of shock, engaging in any kind of shaming responses, or showing pity. The intensely private and shameful feelings that are associated with self-injury prevent many from seeking treatment. So self-injurers often appear in emergency rooms only when self-inflicted wounds are so severe that they require medical treatment like stitches or bone setting. As so little is known about self-injury, even in the medical community, is often misunderstood by medical staff who provide that initial treatment. And the misunderstanding, particularly think about our emergency medicine folks who are burnt out and overworked, it can lead to extremely inappropriate treatments in some cases, like stitching without anesthesia or anesthetic, or intense feelings of frustration by the provider who's asking, why would you hurt yourself? Such reactions, if expressed shock or punitive ways, can reinforce the self-injurious behavior and its underlying causes and encourage the self-injurer to continue to avoid seeking care and to not seek help in the future. Self-injury is most often a silent, hidden practice aimed at squelching negative feelings, overcoming emotional numbness. So being willing just to listen to the self-injurer while reserving your shock and judgment encourages them to use their voice rather than your body as a means of self. That's a very important first step. So that initial conversation, express gratitude. Thank you for sharing that. If you say that a million times, it's not too many, right? And that's really in any mental health conversation, in any time someone shares something personal, you've probably even heard me say it on here when people put stuff in the chat, always thank people. Nobody has to share. And it is an opportunity to then provide. So some of the things we can ask, is thank you for sharing that with me. We want to focus on the underlying distress, not like, why are you hurting yourself, but what has you so upset that this is the way that you're expressing. what has you so distressed? What's going on? That is so powerful because, like Kimberly just put in the chat, it's always the way adults respond. Why would you do this? Why would you do this to yourself? Why would you do this to me? Right? And so if that looks different and feels different, imagine the relief of a person who has chosen to share that with you, right? So we want to address our observations directly. If we have concerns about infection, if this is causing us hurt and pain, we can share that. That's okay. It really upsets me to see yourself. What has you so upset? It's okay to talk about how it's impacting you. It's fine. Don't make it about you, but you can share that. That's real. Listen non-judgmentally. Again, this goes back to like, what if this is something so severe and the why is minor or something you perceive as minor, right? So don't judge the why. We can ask about it, right? But don't judge it. Avoid overreacting. Address any medical emergencies. There's that initial response. Now, if we are walking through this with somebody, we're a parent, we're the primary caregiver, or we're the professional that's working with them, and this is our responsibility. Parental detection, know this, of self-harm is associated with an increased likelihood of professional help. Parents play a key role. Schools, parents, medical practitioners, other youth-serving professionals, they all have an important role to play in identifying self-injury and assisting youth in getting help. Unfortunately, there's a lot of lack of information, as we already know, and it's hampered the creation of informational materials and treatment options, right? There are very few places in the whole country that are just for this. For a long time, there was a place in Illinois, the Safe Alternatives Program in Linden Oaks Hospital in Edward, Illinois. For a very long time, it was the only place. Now, there might have been other providers that also treated this, but that was the only inpatient facility that was just there's not very many. And so that's selfinjury.com if you're interested in taking a look at their program. They've been around a while. But there's a small growing body of evidence that exists to help us help them. And very little literature exists to explain, what's happening. So this can be very difficult. But one of the things everybody seems to agree on, the research in the area right now, is that structure, consistency, and predictability are very important elements in forming relationships with self, right? So developing plans which emphasize the following, right? If we're helping somebody get professional help and we're bridging that gap, so we're going to say, what are we going to do in the meantime? What are we going to do while we're going through this journey, right? This is some things you can emphasize for a very effective plan, right? We want that to include taking some responsibility for happening. This is what I'm doing. This is my actions, right? Take some responsibility. We want to reduce the harm inflicted by the behavior, right? So we're going to assess the safety of the practices. Over 1/4 of hospitalized adolescents who self-injured reported that they had feared cutting implements. Not only are there hazards of disease transmission and infection with that, but bringing dangerous objects to certain places like school can lead to detention, suspension. Like, we're compounding a lot of our problems now, right? So the folks who self-injures, as well as those of us who are detecting and intervening, need to adopt strategies for reducing them, right? But there's a consequence of some of that behavior that we want to mitigate, right? So identifying, the other is identifying like more positive ways to react to our self-injury triggers, right? And our physical cues, identifying safe people and places go to for assistance when needing to reduce the urge to self-injure. And then avoiding objects that can be used to self-injure, paper clips, staples, erasers, sharp objects can help reduce the harm that's associated with those practices, and can help if we can agree on some of that, like, hey, let's remove some of these objects while we're getting help. That can help build some trust, right? And then a plan like this and serve to help stabilize the situation and provide structure and support until the counseling can begin or really begins to impact. Because keep in mind, it's not like we make someone an appointment, they go, we already know this, right? I'm preaching to the choir. They go and suddenly we're not doing this behavior anymore, right? We're gonna have to manage this a little bit while we're going through treatment, right? Yeah, thank you. Gail shared, if we're gonna reduce our access to the objects that we're using to self-injure. Let's not guess what those are, right? Let's ask the person, what do you use, and let's keep them safe for now by trying to reduce or eliminate access. Right? And so this is a good sort of frame of reference to help stabilize. Some guidance for a group setting. I promised you I would come back to this, right? So if you are working in a group setting with youth and you've either detected or it's been disclosed or even some preventative stuff, right? So the first thing we want to do is we want to assess the level of group involvement. Group self-injury is often a means of group bonding and membership, and it's undertaken with, because of that, the the aims are other than just reducing anxiety or coping with overwhelming negative feelings the way it is for like the individual self-injurer. These differences in motivation, more of a belonging thing, are likely to necessitate differences in approaches to intervention and prevention. And we want to identify and intervene in group self-injurious activities right away. Um, we want to identify who's involved, the nature and the lethality of the self-injurious activities that are being used, and the purpose that it's serving for the individuals in the group. Those are important first steps in effective. So, like, let's make sure that we are assessing like what exactly is going on, what's the benefit, what does this look like in this particular group. You can also develop guidelines as an organization, right? Institutions such as secondary schools, universities should consider adopting formal guidelines for detecting and managing self-injurious behaviors. This is how we handle it. This is what we do. In a recent national study of university mental health staff, fewer than 1/3 of the respondents indicated that the institutions that they worked possessed a set of guidelines for managing self-injurious or other depression-related behaviors. And almost all of them agreed, but we should, right? So we seem to be on the cusp of this as an industry, like really understanding that this is something that we should be preparing for. Right? Um, Speaking of preparing for, right, prevention practices in a group setting. If this is not something that's present in your group setting right now, great. Let's keep it that way by making sure that we are offering prevention programming through the teaching of coping skills and strategies. Having those skills for emotional regulation helps to increase the likelihood that this will never enter the picture as a negative focus. Let's make sure that particularly young people have as many emotional regulation coping strategies as possible that are healthy and are clinical treatment. Again, I'm not going to go into the weeds on this too much, but the reason I went back and forth, honestly, if I was even going to share this piece, but the reason I wanted to, because I don't want to be ethically irresponsible as somebody who's not a clinician. But if we are a parent, or we are a teacher, or we are a school social, right? Like, and we're helping to connect someone to professional services, we might want to know what we're looking for. We might want to know, or even talking to somebody who is nervous about what treatment looks like and what are my options and what I'm afraid of it. And just even looking at like providers' websites, and do they offer this? And they say that they treat self-injury, but how? What is the description, right? So knowing sort of what we're looking for and what we know can be effective, I think is a help. So there's a number of modalities that therapists can use to intervene in the practice of self-injury. And again, this won't surprise you because there is so much lacking in the research. There's also certain things that are agreed on and certain things that some people are going, I don't know about that, or there's a combination of this, right? So this is still evolving as well. Dialect behavior therapy, DBT, and cognitive behavior therapy, CBT. Um, and interventions like those that focus on understanding, tolerating, accepting emotions, and emotional regulation while learning healthy use of coping skills like interpersonal effectiveness are typically the most helpful for those who self-injure, right? While there are few psychotherapeutic treatments that have been designed specifically for non-suicide self-injury in adolescents, a research review suggests that CBT in combination with medication adjustments can be more effective than just changing agent, right? So now we're seeing that medication and therapy cannot combine, right? Um, There's several studies that suggest that DBT was the most effective form of CBT because it actively targets the depressive symptoms. That makes sense because of the underlying stress that we know is there, right? Um, However, so much of this has been studied on individuals who also have borderline personality disorder because it's being treated as like a symptom of that. And so there's a lot lacking, particularly in adult studies that particularly talk about adolescents who do not have BPD. And so some of this is still being talked about. Now, mentalization-based treatments, which are things that help individuals who self-injure learn how to separate their own thoughts and feelings from those of others, that also shows some early promise. And a recent study examining multiple psychotherapies suggests that mentalization-based treatment was the only intervention that was effective in reducing it. Just one recent study, but it's notable nonetheless. Most treatment providers who are familiar with self-injuries will use some or all of these approaches in ways that they find are most likely to help their client. Collaborative strength-based approaches are also popular and among specialists. And because these modalities integrate aspects of DBT and CBT, but they also focus strongly on shared goal setting with the client, engaging the family, other members of the client's social sort of makeup as a means of support, emphasizing existing or easy to develop strengths in the recovery. So there's a lot missing sort of here. And as a non-clinician, Gail, unfortunately, I'm not able to answer the question of what classes of medication are effective. I wish that I could. So I just want to be upfront about that. Oh, I see your question. It's a good one. And I don't have the answer, but I can try to find that out. And maybe we can put that in the notes when I'll talk to my clinical partners, and then we maybe can put that in the notes, Robert, if that's okay, before it goes up on the list. Okay, so now we need to talk about suicide, right? And we need to talk about suicide because even though non-suicide self-injury is not a suicide behavior, it's a higher level mental health crisis that, if unaddressed, can worsen and put a person at risk for suicide ideology and right. Since we have had robust conversations about how they're not the same, it's equally important to discuss ways in which they can be related or how to respond to that escalation if and when. The relationship is complicated. Studies find that most people with non-suicide self-injury history report not considering suicide at all. So most people who self-injure don't consider suicide. However, and this is where it starts to sound like a paradox, but we're also seeing that of the people who self-injure without suicide intent, so that group of folks, are more likely to have a suicide attempt at some point in their lifetime. So there's some connection here, right? And it's really important to note that while it doesn't there's not causation, right, to suicide thoughts and behaviors, it does lower inhibition to suicide behaviors if one begins to feel suicidal, since people who have practice hurting their bodies might find it easier to hurt themselves lethally, right? Meaning the fact that somebody has practiced hurting their body makes it easier for a suicide attempt if the stress becomes. So they travel together, right? So causation is unclear. However, consistently what we're seeing is saying no to causation, totally separate things, but they travel together. So the relationship is complicated, and it all comes back to the root, right? Think about a tree. The root of the tree, right, is this underlying distress. Also is a risk factor. And so knowing that how they are related is very suicide is preventable, right? That's the good thing, and that's not designed to make anybody feel bad if they have lost someone to suicide. It's not, this is just designed to give you some hope, right? That it's the second leading cause of death in youth ages 10 to 24. But more than 95% of people who kill themselves have depression or other diagnosed mental or substance disorder, often in combination with with other mental disorders, right? So if 95% of people who die by suicide have depression and other diagnosable mental health and substance disorders, right? What does that mean? That means if it's diagnosable, it's treatable, right? And that's why we say it's permanent. And the key is addressing that underlying distress. The key to a lot of this is finding and addressing the underlying distress. So early intervention saves. When we can figure that out, and we can get early intervention in, we increase the likelihood of. Now let's talk about the conversation we have to have with someone who is experiencing thoughts and behaviors of suicide. This looks a lot like the conversation that we outlined before, but there's a key difference that I really want to talk to you guys about. So it's very important that when we are having conversations with someone, initiating a conversation, but our concern is a suicide concern, right? Appearing confident is really, really important. I love the analogy of a duck on the pond, right? Super serene and calm and floating along, but underneath the surface, those little feet are moving crazy fast, trying to figure out what they're going to do next, right? Just to keep it afloat. So I love that analogy. Again, like this doesn't get easier. You just get better at it, but it always feels this, right? So try to understand how they feel from their point of view. We're going to encourage them to express their feelings. This is when we get to the asking questions part, right? We're going to be empathetic. We're going to focus on our concern for their well-being. And we can instill hope by asking about long-term plans or goals, even giving them the very accurate information that this active place doesn't last forever. This active place of desiring to die is not a long-term thing. It's very time-bound. Now, it can be repetitive if we're not addressing the underlying distress, but that active suicide crisis will pass. So when we start the conversation, it looks the same way. I'm concerned about you, and here's why. We're going to state the concern. We're going to note the observation, and then here's where it changes. Now we're going to be direct. We are going to ask them specifically about suicide. It is a myth that asking someone about suicide puts the idea in their head. That's the fear. It has been absolutely dispelled. It is not real. It has the opposite effect. Research is very clear in this area that it shines a light in a dark place. It is a relief, and it very much can save lives. The difference between saving lives. Okay? So we have to ask the question. This is very uncomfortable. If anyone's ever had to ask this before, you know that it's uncomfortable, but it's so necessary. Where we stop skirting around the issue and we ask very directly, are you thinking of killing yourself or are you thinking about suicide? This is a difficult question to ask. Why do you think we don't, and you can just drop this in the chat, why do you think we don't say, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Different actions, too open-ended. We're afraid of trigger. Okay, excellent. Point blank period, not direct enough. I love it. Okay, you guys get it, right? We just covered hurting. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. The other thing I would offer is this is a really dark thing to have to disclose to somebody and to talk to somebody about. And if you can't even say the word, why would I trust you with that information? Why would I answer your question accurately? I wouldn't, right? So credibility, and directness and clarity, right? So a couple of things, right? Now, a yes is sometimes sounds like a no. A no is very direct. A yes is like, I don't know, maybe. I'm not gonna lie and say I never thought about it, right? That's all kind of a not no, right? So if we get a not no, we have to ask about the plans. This is very uh, yeah. Oh, Kim, thank you for sharing that, right? I could answer no, I'm not thinking of hurting myself because I think I've picked a way that's not going to hurt. I answered you honestly, because you didn't ask the right question. So I love that. I don't mean to digress, but I saw that and I loved it. Okay, so when we get that not no, or that maybe, or that yes, we got to ask what that, have you thought about how, thought about when, and get an idea of where we are in this crisis. If we have a plan, that's an emergency phone call, period. Okay. If we don't have a plan, we can keep the person safe for now, right? We don't ever ask somebody not to kill themselves. It's just, they're just going to go, yeah, okay, sure. But we can ask them to give us a day. We can say, what can we do to get through tonight so we can make a call in the morning if we've determined that this is not a call right now, right? We can have a collaborative time-bound agreement to delay the suicide. a mutual agreement on the temporary removal of means. My stepson is a Air Force veteran. When he came back from deployment, we had a suicide crisis where he was contemplating very seriously. And part of our safety plan before we got him connected with somebody was, let's go ahead and put your firearms in dad's garage. Let's just go ahead and take care of that right now. He also took pain medication. So I said, well, how about until Tuesday when I think we'll be able to get into your guy at the VA. Let's, how many pain pills do you need between now and then? Let me give you your doses and I'm going to keep the rest. So safety plan for now is really important, right? A timeline that includes future conversations. We're going to talk in the morning. We're going to talk tomorrow. On Tuesday, we're going to go down there, right? And then a possible call to a crisis line for support. Calling a crisis line doesn't mean that we're Baker acting somebody. It doesn't mean that somebody's coming to the house. We have that option, right? It doesn't mean we're going anywhere. Sometimes we can call to just talk to someone and get some advice. And that's really helpful. And I'm going to share with you some of those. Actually, right now, I'm going to share with you. Okay, so I want to share with you Credible Mind. It's not Credible Minds with an S, it's Credible Mind, crediblemindorg. Right? So I want to share with you this because it is a wonderful resource. I like to call it BuzzFeed, except it's science-based, right? You can take quizzes, assessments, get some really good credible resources, lots of wonderful things that are available. There's tons of topics on this website, but here is the flyer that takes you directly to the area on self-injury. I want to get to some other things and we're running out of time, so I'm going to go quickly. There's also the mental health check-in. There's also a section on suicide, so I included these when you get the PowerPoint, and when it goes up online, you'll have those resources as well. They'll take you right to those pages that can really help. But here's some other really good places to find support. 988, somebody immediately put that in the chat, and I love it. It should be at our fingertips, right? 988 is wonderful. You can also go to the website. You can call 988 to just talk to somebody. The person in crisis can call 988. You can call 988 on behalf of someone. Anybody can call 988. Please do. You can also text home to 741-741 for the same type of support. Every county in the state of Florida has a mobile response team, a group of clinicians that can come to your location within the hour. Some are handled by the county, some are handled by a provider. There's the website, myflfamilies.com/specialty-treatment-team-maps. That'll be there for you in the PowerPoint, right? Select mobile response teams. It will show you in your county who that is, right? To Write Love on Her Arm. Somebody asked before, is there an online support group for people who self-injure? It's a wonderful organization that's on a lot of college campuses, but I don't think that they are age limited. And they have some really credible information that's very youth focused, and some supportive spaces online. That's a great, if you have a high school program, oh, thank you, Kim. Thank you for sharing that too, that this is an organization near and dear to your heart. She says it saved her life. I mean, that's an incredible endorsement, and I'm so glad that they did. And I'm glad that you shared that with us. So it's a really good organization, been around a long time. And then, of course, if the body-focused repetitive behaviors portion intrigued your interest at all, they do have a website, bfrb.org, that can give you some more information about that as well. So I'm going to turn this back over to Robert, because I know he's got to wrap it up, and here's some references that you'll see as well. Don't worry about that, because Robert's going to do his own, so I'll just get it off of that. But I'm going to turn it back over to you, Robert. Not exactly sure how to do that. Can you just take control? There we go. I can put it, there we go. All right. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you for such a wonderful presentation. I know we had a lot of engagement, a lot of interest in this webinar. Really appreciate you tackling such a needed subject. I want to let everybody know that due to time, we may have missed a couple of questions. We have Laura's email up here, lholley@ccaflorida.org or ccafl.org, excuse me. If you'd like to copy that down, email her with any questions about this webinar, about related topics, you can do so. Please hold on for a few business items before we conclude. I just put a link to the evaluation in the chat. I will paste it again. Additionally, when I end the webinar, your web browser will populate a message that says the host or presenter would like WebEx meetings to open a website on your computer. If you click continue, you will be automatically redirected to the evaluation. To complete the evaluation, you must sign into your FATA account. If you do not have an account, you can register for one at no cost. Under the sign in menu, there is a button that says haven't registered yet. Click on that to complete account registration. Please use the same email address you used when you registered for today's webinar when you set up your profile in FATA system. This is the only way for us to connect your attendance with WebEx to your evaluation completion. For CEs to be reported to CE Broker for Florida licensed healthcare practitioners, you must provide an accurate Florida Department of Health license prefix and number the first time you register. If you need to add or update your license number, you may do so by logging in and clicking Edit on the professional information section of your profile. You'll get a third opportunity to complete the evaluation through a follow-up email later today. As a reminder, the evaluation will close at the end of the day on Wednesday, January 29th, 2025. For assistance with account login, account registration, or evaluation completion, fill out a contact us form on our website or email training@floridabha.org. We do not email statements of credit. Instead, after we verify your attendance and completion of the evaluation, a statement of credit will be posted to the professional development section of your profile in your FATA account within 30 business days. You must have attended the entire webinar and completed the evaluation for a statement of credit. We are not permitted to provide partial credit. As a reminder, the recording and materials used in today's presentation will be available on the FATA website within 30 business days. To access the recording in PowerPoint, visit www.fata.org, navigate to the Resource Center, and click on Training Library as shown on the screen. Thank you for participating in today's webinar. Thank you again, Laura, for your presentation. We'd also like to recognize and thank the Florida Department of Children and Families for funding today's education. Have a great day, everyone, and please hold for the evaluation.